applicants in front of us today, so we thought we'd take today's agenda and use it for some zoning updates and a few staff briefings before the end. So with that in mind, I'm going to turn it over to Aaron.
Thank you, Bill. If you don't mind, may I do the staff introductions?
Please.
Cover that, and then I'll jump back to the C1, C1A, and the High Street corridor stuff. So we just, off camera, just introduced Aaron Schaefer, our new principal planner. Aaron started on September 10th, formerly of Salem's Planning Department. It's been a great start so far. We're already taking her share of the work off of the rest of us, so that's much appreciated. Mr. Fields, the planning director, will start on Thursday, October 4th. So we are looking at being fully staffed for the first time in
3 years.
Yeah, years.
Francine looks relieved.
This week was a little disjointed in that we've had some space management movements going on up in the planning office, so the next time you come by the space, people will probably be in slightly different desks and whatnot as we try to figure out how to fit everybody in. Basically, we have one additional, in the reorganization that occurred, we ended up with kind of an extra head in our office space, and so that's kind of caused some trading of spaces to go around. So we're still where we are, but when you go in there, you might see a different configuration. So really excited to have onboarded Aaron, and excited to bring David in late next week. And so hopefully, you know, not to say that we have been unproductive as of late, but there's definitely been some things that we want to get to that haven't been able to find their way to the top of the pile just because of priorities. I think in particular we'll be looking at updating subdivision rules and regulations. You may remember that in 2012-ish, Kate Day started that project and it never really got off the ground. But the rules are older than your entire staff, so I think we're going to try to do something about that and bring that up to date. So anyway, we have some things planned, and we'll double back with you on that once we have David on board and get our feet under us. As far as downtown corridor zoning update, the C1, C1A, and the High Street corridor, the board has not met since the summit on September 6th with the selectmen and the zoning board of appeals. And at that meeting, staff, Steve Barth, the town manager, and I kind of proposed conceptualizing and going to town meeting of those two parts of the puzzle together to kind of streamline what I think will be the abutter issues in some of the process. So what we have done since that meeting is basically we went through the 40A process, the 40R timeline. Francine is owed a great deal of thanks for going through the pile, and then at the 11th hour finding Georgia's write-up of the same. The good news is that they matched. And as it turns out, we had about 25 events over 15 months.
That's all?
That's all, yeah.
I thought there were 25
Interspersed in that were the planning board meetings and whatnot, but eventually, essentially we scheduled 25 events over that 15 months. So what we spent a little time doing in the last couple weeks was trying to transpose that process, that outline onto what we think will be the next 12 to 13 months. In talking in hindsight with Steve after, compressing from the summit, we're kind of sketching out a special town meeting in 2019, November 2019. Again, that could move a little forward, that could move a little back, but kind of using that as the middle of the road benchmark. And I'll pass this out. I'll take a couple, pass that down. This is not very extensive, but we just wanted to share with the board tonight just to make sure that, again, everyone's on the same page. And I have a few for the audience since I printed out enough for everybody. Thank you, Aaron. And again, this is still very much malleable, but basically we're just trying to figure out something in the vein, I mean, everyone, especially at the summit, felt we could do a similar process, but maybe not quite as many meetings because we've kind of starting from a very different spot than we were then. So we agree with that. I still think, you know, when you count up all the monthly meetings that the planning board and selectmen take up and all of those, you know, as I put it, kind of strategic outreach to those other groups, you still end up in that, you know, dozen plus meetings, and then there's obviously the unanticipated, unexpected. So I'm saying loosely 18 to 24 meetings over the next, you know, 13, 14 months. Definitely having a couple of large public workshop events. I think, again, I don't want to be held to anything, but we were thinking that first kind of big one maybe happening in March. That gives the special town meeting in January, February for Smith School a chance to breathe. We hit in between the two vacations before people start turning to annual town meeting mode. So I think there's a spot in the calendar that makes sense to kind of do something. Talked to Ted Brovitz via email the last couple weeks. We'll be receiving his draft product on the C1, C1A area. He says at the end of this week. Need to kind of add the High Street piece to that. So that may, but certainly by the, you know, the next month or two, we should be coming back with pretty mature standards, and again, leaving us to do a process piece with the community. So that's where we're at, and I know you guys have not had a chance to decompress or share any thoughts and comments that you may have had as a result of the summit meeting. So just wanted to use, again, this is not intended to be a big, long meeting, but we want at the staff level to make sure that we're giving you the opportunity to give us any feedback as we kind of put more meat on this schedule.
Okay.
Lots there.
Anyone from the board want to start?
So the large March 2019 meeting. So we've backed in from that fall date?
Yeah.
Okay. What do you anticipate us doing between now and March? Because first of all, so is Ted's contract being expanded to include the High Street?
We have to talk to Ted about what that is going to entail on his end.
Okay.
Yeah.
So.
I would imagine there's going to be something along those lines.
Okay, so that will be expanded, and we'll be looking at both of those areas. I thought the meeting was very good. I thought that there was a good interaction with people, and I thought that, you know, we've said for years what we look for is support from the other volunteer boards and also the Board of Selectmen when we put this through. And so I thought it was great that they were there, and there was a good representation, the ZBA and the Board of Selectmen. And I thought that was a good meeting. I think in some areas, this is not going to be as extensive because I think people understand, you know, the fact that there's no housing allowed downtown, and the affordable housing piece. There was some information on Facebook today. Some people brought up the affordable housing. And I think people understand that, but I think on the other end, we're going to have some issues with other things like parking and traffic.
Yeah.
So are you anticipating us doing anything before the big March meeting? Are we going to start working on, I mean, I don't know how many people have looked at Nelson Nygat in a while, but, you know, take a view of Nelson Nygat and the.
I think there'll be lots going on between
Okay.
now and then.
Okay.
We haven't gone
So
down
just
to the
because it's just a
specifics,
big
but I
meeting.
mean,
So when we go to this big meeting, we'll have a pretty good idea of what we're looking for
I think
and the areas that we need to address. Okay, good. That sounds great. I'm glad
I
we're
mean,
tackling that.
Ted's, if you map where we are today to where we were with the 40R, I mean, once Mr. Brovitz delivered his schematics and the design standards, that was quite, I guess it did happen early, but I mean, that was a significant part of the process, and we're already there, and we really haven't even started the outreach process. So I think, again, we're well ahead of where we were, and one hopes we can continue to use that momentum to
Good.
get going.
My concerns are, we were successful with the Locust Street and, the industrial one piece, which then has now expanded even further from the C1A, and then the further, are we combining that with the further industrial piece on High Street? So we're trying to do everything at one town meeting, but I think, my concern is that we do definitely break it up into probably 3 different warrant articles, because,
Yeah.
and maybe the map warrant articles, so maybe you're talking 6 warrant articles, but my concern is now with the expansion, and there was some confusion, at least in my mind, as to, well, we may include these houses, we may not include these houses on Elm Street or Park Street or wherever, and that's still in flux and still in play, and I'm just a little concerned that if we start expanding that zone, it might hurt the momentum for the other work that we've done for the downtown stuff, basically, from the fire station down to,
Yeah.
I mean, the direct downtown stuff. Now we're expanding that to C1A and getting into the other residential neighborhoods. I think that you might face some opposition on that where you're seeking to expand it. So I definitely want to keep it clear that the I-1 has always been our bent, and that's what we've been cleaning up over the last several years. Stick with that for the High Street, which I think is a decent sell, but I know you want to have the big picture. I'm just concerned about, well, there's a couple houses on Locust Street
Yeah.
we should add. There's a couple houses on Park Street, a couple houses on Elm Street, it's a little,
Well, and I think
Nerve- nerve.
that element of detail is why we have to have the public process, and we haven't had that yet. So the fine points, I think, are rightly to be determined as we engage with the community about where the edges are. I think to your point on the bigger picture is, if in 6 months, 9 months, the group determines that there is some legitimate issues that need a deeper dive or are gonna require more time, then we can reassess. I mean, we shouldn't, I'm not looking to make this the Alamo, our stand at the Alamo, but I think my concern was, once looking at the scope of this, that to talk to somebody on Hunt Street about C1, C1A, and not be candid with them that at the fire station next year, you might see us again. I think we're better off starting out this process as, here's what we're trying to get to with this total project. And if everything's good and we can answer the questions and address those concerns, then we've got a right-sized project. If we run into issues that become intractable and it doesn't make sense to hold up C1, C1A for a debate we're having at, the other end of High Street, then we break the project apart. But I think, again, I want to, especially as we talk about as we go into the process and talk about streetscape enhancements and what are some of the things the community is gonna want to get out of this development, to have those 2 projects not talking to each other, I think does a disservice to us and the vision that we have for that corridor. So that's my thought. But again, I think your point's very well taken, and that's why we have to have some sort of framework for the process going forward so that we can reassess that at the
well,
appropriate time.
like Peg said, I think we have to be ready for the question that says, okay, what if you build it all out? And we know that's not gonna happen at once, it's gonna be gradual to a certain degree. But if you build it all out,
Yep.
are we gonna be putting up 3-story parking garages, where public parking is now? Because where is everyone gonna park?
Yep.
Where are people gonna live? And what's the density and traffic gonna be? Because that's the frightening aspect of it.
Yep.
And maybe you scale down the C1A to 2 stories instead of 3, or things like that. I know we've already just, approved the 3 stories, for
At 4450.
44 and 50, and we've got
Yep.
4 stories is being built on Locust Street, which have kind of set kind of the tone for those areas. But I mean, we have a parking study, but I don't think it anticipates this tremendous potential build
Right.
out.
Yep.
Which I think that's got to be something.
And that's incumbent on
And that only
us in
goes
the
as far as
process.
Elm Street too, I think. The parking study parameters,
Yep.
I think, went as far as Elm. I think that, we found when we were doing Danversport that, people didn't want to be included in. We tried to stay out of residential areas. I know I should know this after 18 years, but C1A allows housing, doesn't it? Does C1A allow housing?
I was gonna say C1A does, C1 does not.
C1 does not. So C1A does, but maybe the way.
But
they-
we
But it doesn't allow
expanding
the multi, I don't think, I
density.
No
think
mixed
it,
use.
Expanding
Okay.
it doesn't allow the
more
mixed use
density.
in the housing above or
Right.
something like that.
No, but I think, isn't that condominium development right behind Cherry Street in C1A, and that was allowed? I think that met the
I
criteria.
apologize,
I'm
I
not
don't
sure.
remember off the top
I'm
of my
not
head
sure.
either.
But,
They might have gone into ZBA before, though.
okay.
I think
But-
I'd have to go back and look at
But
it.
the thing
I don't
is, you know, I think what we did with
Jones Brothers?
Maple Street, which was interesting,
No,
that, and I think you're right,
the fish
Jim, it
market
could be
that
that we
used to
reach
be
a
there.
point that maybe
On the other side, across the
we have
street.
Ted do the whole thing, but you
Yeah.
break off a component. But I think that we should look more like at subsets or districts, not with the lines. I think at the ZBA and BOS meeting, you could see people were confused by the lines of the sub-districts, but kind of like what was done in the Maple Street overlay where, you know, in this area, this is what's allowed, this is what's allowed, this is what, and you're transitioning back, because there are residents in back, transitioning back to more residential, smaller residential. So I think that is probably kind of a way, but I think Ted would probably, he came up with the sub-districts because of the concern on Maple Street. I think that,
Yeah, I was pleasantly surprised when I first got on staff and talked to Ted about the map and his nuance to it. So I think he understands, and I think that's why the lines were looking the way they were looking and why he created two islands kind of off to the west of downtown, because I think he was sensitive to that, you know, to that context. But, yeah, I think, and again, we haven't talked to Ted about
But I think
any of this yet.
the other
so.
thing, you go to the core reasoning behind it. Are we trying to increase the density downtown by offering these, you know, the worst case is you get it all built out, and now is the town gonna, because the town's getting more tax money, will the town put in these multi-story parking garages? And is that what the town wants? I think we have to be careful as to what we might wish for and how that's gonna bounce back. Is this what we want? We don't want the town to be Beverly, we don't want it to be Salem, you know, with the density, but I mean, the byproduct is people say, hey, we've got some extra money, it's a great town, let's throw a bunch of these buildings downtown now, the 3 stories, and, oh, wait a minute, we don't have enough parking.
Well, and again, though, I mean, I look at it
But
as,
we've
those
allowed
are,
it.
those are questions that the process has to answer for us, right? As we take this out, we see Ted's drafts, we flesh it out, ask ourselves these questions about at full build-out, at half build-out, what do we have? Again, how attractive is this going to be to the market as far as absorption, and what are we actually likely to get? And I think, I fully believe the board will be the first to tell us, whoa, that feels a little too much, and we'll calibrate that as we go. And again, I think that's why if we can, once we start that process, we have those check-in points, we'll know, in my opinion, if what we want, to your point, what we want is too much, then
Yeah,
we
if we're
go
gonna
back
get, if
to
we're
the
gonna
other
get
groups and.
200-something units at the fire station area, and then we add another, you know, from that point down to High Street,
Yep.
and you add another potential 300 or 400 units, I don't know, you know.
but the parking would go along with the unit, I mean, the units down under the Maple Street overlay allow for, you know, parking and parking
Yeah,
garage.
they allow for a reduced parking component in
But it
exchange
also
for the
parking.
40R, and they give you a discount, and they anticipate that you're only gonna need one parking space for a 2-bedroom, which I don't think is practical, because we don't have a train.
We're
Buses
not
don't
talking
have to-
40R on this. We have more control over the standards on this and the density.
But what I'm saying is, you know, if it does get built out and the whole place is redeveloped, then it may turn out to be something that's, the town's gonna have to react and say, okay, well, we're getting all this new tax revenue, so we are gonna have to put in a 2 or 3-story park garage over here, or maybe one behind Cherry Street, and maybe one over here, because this is what you wanted, and this is what the townspeople voted for, so where are they all gonna park, and how are we gonna handle the traffic? That's just a,
But that's incumbent on us to make sure that as we develop this proposal, that we're covering ourselves from that eventuality. Or we agree that we want to take some element of risk on, you know, I might be comfortable here, you might be comfortable here, but, you know, I think as we triage that, we'll figure out what we are comfortable with, and I see C1 and C1A as a different beast than the High Street area. I mean, the High Street area is the MAPC reports. I want to say it's, right now, 60% open. And
It
to
is,
Peg's,
it is.
they'll have to park themselves as they go. Now, again, it's on us to ensure that the parking rates are realistic and reasonable for the context. C1, C1A, that could be a little bit of a thornier problem because we're dealing with already a built-out environment, but I don't think that's the case at High
Well, the
Street.
C1, C1A is right. I mean, we're not talking about 200, not necessarily 200 apartments, because we're talking about maybe just going up above stores and things like that.
Yeah.
I mean, right in the right downtown, there's not the space that you have over at, and the type of industrial buildings that like Hot Wat has over by Maple Street. It's more of a concentrated downtown, and I think if we're looking at housing there, we're probably looking at second and third floors and that type of thing. As you get closer to High Street, you know, most of the people down there were very happy with what they had. They were more concerned with amenities and you know, crossing and sidewalks and trees and things like that. The availability of space to construct more affordable multifamily type housing is kind of more in back when you get down that area. I mean, I don't see a real buildup like a long strip like Maple Street is. I think it's, there will be some larger buildings, yes. I mean, there's the capability of McDonald's going out and that being a large building.
McDonald's will never
Someday.
go out because
Someday.
they go there
Well, we don't know.
enough to keep them in business.
But, I mean, some of those buildings could,
We could
developers
definitely
could
put,
put
I mean, we had several buildings being put in that, in the back there. We had several
in the back where,
where that Contos development there,
Yeah.
Get up, when you
Well,
get
he
off
did
the
the
street
strip mall.
itself, yeah.
yeah.
around the back there. You could put
Yeah.
in several.
Well, I could see
Cold
it
storage.
going there.
Let's let this side of the table
yeah,
have a
hey,
little bit of
oh, really?
conversation.
Well, I think we got to define what do we think is success? You know, I think it really gets to what Jim's talking about. I mean, obviously, there's a strong demand for residential now, but if you don't have the balance of mixed use, to me, that'd be a complete waste. And then it's, what I'm trying to get a sense for, and maybe Aaron, you got a better feel for this, is where's the private investment want to focus? Right, I do think it's what we already started in the Hot Wat location. It's a little disappointing that the Locust Street project seems to be stalled. You know, it's, I mean, so, and then I also think we have an opportunity to look at the facade improvement all through the town. You know, and, you know, better signage and all that stuff. And I don't know where we stop and other boards step up, but it's a great opportunity for the town to have a little facelift that we're all gonna be happy with. But I agree with what you're saying, Jim. It's, you know, it's the height, but just important to me, it's gonna be, where's the investment gonna be?
Yep.
Right, because the first project's gotta be successful. And I think if that's successful, then it's gonna create some momentum. But you can see where the lines are, you know, it is getting expanded out, and, you know, and I enjoyed that joint meeting too. I thought that was very well done. It's kind of interesting to see where, you know, where we're gonna stop, and I, you know, if I was a property owner, I'd want to be included. I mean, the value of your property goes up dramatically if you're in that zone, in my opinion. So we'll see, you know, we'll see where it goes.
I think just one of the things I've been batting around, to your point, John, about, you know, facade improvements, and the concept in general is that, and I think it's a little bit of what Jim was touching on as well, is there has to be a get for the community beyond just the tax revenue. I mean, that is important in this town, given its fiscal, you know, realities, that it really doesn't want to do an override. So it's basically, we've got to find it in the tax levy. So new growth is, for better or for worse, a reality that we have to find, and we have to make sure there's those opportunities to keep that stream coming. That said, like, you know, the incentive payment we got for the 40R district, approximately $200,000, you know, I'm trying to lobby for, you know, can we use that for a facade improvement program? You know, I mean, the development happening in the district has to get somehow recycled back into the district to some extent, beyond just the tax dollars. And Peg mentioned the High Street corridor. Basically, the comments we got from the public that we've engaged with thus far has largely been focused on the pedestrian environment and experience up and down that corridor. How do we build into this zoning the mechanism that, as the developers make their investments, that somehow something is spilling back into the public realm? at the same time to ensure that it's not just tax dollars that we're getting, that there's tangible, real benefits to the community. And I think trying to direct some of those funds to a facade improvement program to kind of go down the whole corridor with it, and streetscape improvements. Those are kind of the things that we're batting around.
I agree.
Charles?
Excuse me, I apologize for my voice. I have a bit of a cold. I echo some of Jim's concerns about traffic and parking, although I'm a little bit on the opposite side of the spectrum. I mean, this is a pipe dream and probably heresy, but I think that the downtown area would be best suited almost, entirely as a community space and almost like Essex Street in Salem. But as someone who tries to drive as seldom as possible and use all other methods, Jim's right, we don't have a lot of practical methods of transit, like trains. And one of the big things that I've noticed is a total lack of covered bus stations, which I think draws people away from taking other methods of transit. If you want to take the bus by the old movie works, I forget what's there now, the bank is there now.
Yeah.
And it's raining or something, you basically just kind of have to huddle up against the side of the wall until the bus comes. So, how practical would it be as we're going through this to try to also increase, the infrastructure around these sorts of things, like building covered bus stations in order to incentivize people to take other methods of transit into like Salem and Beverly?
I
Bike
think it's,
lanes, things like that?
Well, yeah, but, so like,
I know, public transportation,
Yeah.
but other modes.
yeah, no,
Investigating other modes of transportation, such as public transportation or bike mode.
yeah.
again, that's in part why I suggested that the two projects, again, at least at this, where we are today, to talk about them together, because if we wanted to do, bus stop improvements along the corridor, well, why would we just do the one in the C1, C1A area and not forget the one down at Walgreens that is also pretty busy? And if we handled those separately, it might take us longer. But no, to your point, I think it's, as we go forward, I expect to bring out, what does the community want to see in that streetscape? And, that's an open, canvas right now, or a blank canvas. And if people want covered bus stops and bike lanes and all, more crossings, more, that's something that we will craft as we go forward. And that's part of the development plan, right? Again, there's gotta be more than just the tax dollars. And we want, if we're gonna accept 3-story buildings on the street on High Street, what's in it for me? Oh, we say yes to that, I get a curb cut, I get the crosswalk where I've always wanted it. I get better access to the transportation system. Those are the kind of things that I see us having to leverage to ensure that that private investment is benefiting us as a community.
Well, that's a good point that you make, Charles. As far as we tried to get, the one down at the Liberty Tree Mall, which
I
is
was
right
just
near the
thinking
Hyundai dealership.
Oh, yeah, we tried to get
And
that covered.
that's
Kate was
on,
telling me about that once.
private property by the owner of the road there. It's a
Yeah, it's
private
the
road.
gas.
Was there
So
an easement too? Wasn't there an easement they couldn't build above it or
Yeah,
something? There was a
something-
couple
yeah,
of
You'd have
there was a
you'd have
problem
to
behind it. Yeah.
probably have staff do an inventory, and maybe there's a federal grant or some type
That-
of grant that we could go for, or use some of that 200 grand that we got for the 40R, which would seem very well suited to that, to see if then we can approach these private landowners and say, we need an easement, just for the exclusive use to put this structure on it. Because
There's
people are
already a bus
standing there
stop
anyway.
anyways, right.
Yeah.
They've got trash, they're getting soaked. Like you said, if it's not encouraging people in the wintertime, a lot of people who work at the mall have to take that public transportation, and it's not a good fit. There's no lighting, there's nothing there.
Yeah.
So it would be a great way to encourage that, and I think maybe we can have staff, or between the money you got from 40R, which is a perfect purpose for it, I think it would relate to that,
I think the thing that I've been looking at is where we keep, especially I noticed it with the C1, C1A area. When we started, when you showed us the map, it looked a bit more expansive than what I expected. And I'm okay with covering other areas, but kind of alluding back to what Jim was talking about, how we started this with I-1. The one thing I picked up on is that we've always been changing I-1 because it's not uses that are coming into play right now, and there's other things that are going in those areas. So when we have the C1 and C1A, and we start including more extensive areas into the single-family home area, because it's already a C1 or a C1A area right now, those zones are currently more residential than anything else. Should we look at maybe scaling some of those areas back and making them a residential area as an overlay? Because they're already existing as a residential as you get closer to, like Elm Street, if you're going down closer to the town hall, the side streets in there, they've become, even though they might be C1A or C1 because they're adjacent to Lyons Funeral Home on the backside or the bank that's over there, they're really more residential because they're abutting residential areas now. And they've been residential for such a long time, but they started off as C1A because when the planning board 40 years ago was coming up with these, they were just, well, this is what's here now, so we're gonna make it that. And that's how I-1 is, became existent. So I just don't want to lose
And again,
the
that's,
single-family home residents
yep,
that are
and
in that
that's
area.
what the process needs to help us fine tune and figure out what is the tolerance and what are we willing, where are we willing to grow and where do we want to preserve. And again, we're trying to replicate a lot of those positives that we're seeing in those neighborhoods. So the point is not to overrun that neighborhood, the point is to buttress that
Well,
neighborhood. And
That's what happened with C1A, and look at Cherry Street.
Right.
Cherry Street went from some, smaller multifamilies and office buildings.
Right.
And big homes to 6,
And that's really more of a
10,
resident, you get farther into
13,
that, that's more of a
16-unit
residential
condo
area.
developments.
Yeah.
But that again-
were basically allowed by, the zone and
Right.
ZBA.
Right.
And they've greatly expanded the traffic on that street and the density on that street.
I think, not that I
I'm
want to,
sure that was the intent of it.
not that I want to turn this into another 40R conversation, because I'm not sure it's necessarily right for this part of Maple Street and over to Elm Street. But using that overlay of the tapering system, I did like that.
Yep.
Which I think that's a valuable tool that we can use as we taper back and start getting closer to more residential as we get farther into the depths of the town and further away from the downtown area.
This is interesting. In 1974, my first study in urban planning, an urban planning degree, was to investigate downtown Danvers and look at the encroachment of commercial into those side streets and how to decrease the commercial area and protect the residential area. So as we're talking.
And we're still doing it.
I remember walking
Can
around.
you dust that off?
Dust it off, it's probably dust itself. I don't have it, it's 1974. But I walked around all Danvers and did a survey of where the commercial was and how it was beginning to encroach. I remember with Cherry Street, I think Cherry Street Fish Market, I don't know if it was there yet, but there were things coming in on Page Street and so I don't know what the town ever did. I don't know if the town even got it. I have no idea. I just know that as an undergrad, that's what I was doing.
To your point though, Jim, I think the other part of this public process that I hope comes out is that as we engage the community about the current zoning and what we want the proposed zoning to look like, is we may help explain to other local boards why that actions, let's not do too much of that. Let's use those tools sparingly, because after a decade of letting them do that, maybe the results aren't what they thought they were. So again, I mean, this process can help us in that way too, I think. And again, if the planning board and the community through the process determine, well, we don't need to go all the way over to, is it Cherry Street, I think is where one of the lines goes,
Right.
let's pare that back, you know, that's okay.
And we change the zoning or do the overlay? Would we, because that's C1A, right?
I mean, for me, I guess I don't worry about whether we do an overlay or base zoning change or
I think we'd have an
something
easier time
else.
with an overlay.
I mean, I
think so
think we have
too,
an easier
yeah.
time with an overlay, but, I mean, I think for us, that's a detail that it's more, let's focus more, I
Okay.
think, on what are we saying we wanna build, the goal that we talked about, you know, and then figure out what tool is the best tool to get us to that alternative.
Don't forget, when the overlay gets used, if someone comes in and uses the overlay district as their zone, that now becomes the base zone for that site.
Does it, I didn't
Oh,
realize
yeah.
it changed.
Well,
You
Does it?
can't go back to it. If you do an overlay in industrial, and someone comes in and builds non-industrial uses on the overlay, they can't go back and do industrial 10 years down the road.
well, they can demolish this, they could abandon, functionally, you are correct. But I mean, in theory, I could build a mixed-use development and then 3 years into it, decide it didn't work out the way I wanted it, demolish it and go back to I-1.
But that's because the project's not done. I'm
Right,
talking about if the project was
once it's-
finished.
Yeah, once it's done, they're functionally locked into the overlay district.
And you can't 10 years down the road say, well, you know what, industrial uses are coming back, I want to go back to the industrial, you can't do that. Because now it becomes the base, unless you got a, you have to go to ZBA.
ZBA.
That's
The
if-
only
that's
correction
even if
there is it
exists.
doesn't become base zoning. The base zoning is the base zoning, but once you utilize the
Okay.
overlay, you are kind of on that track.
Right, you're on that, you can't go
You're
back
on
to what
that
you were
track.
before.
Yeah, it'd be very, very difficult to go backwards.
So Aaron, is there a, I mean, if you look at, I know we pick on Beverly, but they've done,
Go ahead.
For the record,
I think they've done a very good, I think they've done a very good job from an economic development standpoint. You know,
Well,
if
it's
you,
affected us, all the cars go through
well,
Danvers
that's,
to get
well, that's
to
the
it.
Cummings Center, right, obviously, that's one piece, but if the downtown and-
Cabinet Ranch will really
and how
come along.
vibrant
Yeah.
that community is, you know, obviously, they got the train stop.
Well, there's a vibrancy too there,
Yeah.
too.
So is there a model that we want to look at that's been successful to say, this is what Danvers really should be doing? I'm sure this is rare, we have a rare opportunity, right? But,
Well, there's also been some points over to like Pickering Wharf and Salem. A little bit.
Salem is,
Right, right.
I mean, Salem's done a great job of
I
their,
mean, we have done the visual surveys
Yeah, I
on
mean,
at
Ted has
least
shown some of that,
two
but I don't-
different
I don't know if we want to
occasions.
be that big, John. That's-
No,
that's
I'm
the
not
thing.
saying
I don't
that.
think, I don't
So,
think
but if,
the town wants to be.
but it's the,
Cabot
re-
goes high.
but if,
Yeah,
if
Cabot
They
the,
go five,
pretty high, yeah.
if the residents drive the commercial base, right, and just look at Danvers by, you know, the nature of what we have with the malls, the storefronts that I've seen in Beverly and Salem have improved dramatically because of the housing.
They do, that brings, and I think that's what we'd see in Danvers. It doesn't have to be on the scale, the
Right.
size of
I-
a Beverly or
I
Salem.
totally agree with that.
But if residents are living in the downtown and they need certain services, then someone's gonna go in there a little bit differently. You're not gonna see a number of, we used to talk about all the nail salons. I think that some of them are going away now, but you're not gonna just see nail salons. You're gonna see other services that people want, other goods that they wanna buy coming into the downtown. And I think that's one of the advantages of having this multi-use, because you have more people that will use the services. I was talking to my friend the other day, her niece moved in into a condo on the corner of Cherry. She loves it. She goes down to Kathmandu every morning at 6 o'clock for coffee, before she goes to work. And she walks through the downtown all the time. She'll meet friends at night at the Berry Tavern and walk back home. And that's great. I mean, I think that keeps a more vibrancy of a downtown, not just from 9 to 5, but it's, all the time. And I think we could see different businesses come in. I can't believe Beverly has a bookstore in this day and age. And it's
Well,
working.
it's the
Because there are
rest-
people downtown that go downtown to get books.
Yeah, it's a whole different way. So do we, with your economic development hat now, I mean, what is success have you thought what you determined, you and Steve, what would be success for Danvers a decade from now?
Probably not to the specificity that you're asking, but I mean, at this point, I would say what I think you want downtown to be in realizing the context is, I say a 7 to 11 district. I mean, we want an 18-hour district. You want to be able to go down there at 10 o'clock and still feel like
Yeah.
I can grab something
Yeah.
and there's stuff still open. So that's kind of my goal for the C1, C1A corridor, that piece. High Street is a lot more aspirational, and I think that's gonna be where the community's
Yeah.
gonna really need to give us some input as to how, what is that upper threshold? But I think that corridor, to me, 7 to 11, Ms. Schaefer.
Do you want to use a
Would you have to stand at the podium?
microphone? You gotta use a mic for the people at
Oh,
home.
the people at home,
People at home,
our
you can sit
adoring
there.
TV audience.
Welcome Danvers for Aaron.
So briefly, I think what's important, backing up from a bigger picture from a planning perspective, is that I'm hearing a lot of attributes that are of interest to this board and maybe also to the public as well. One of the things with planning and wearing the planning hat, which covers economic development and traffic and all these good topic areas that we're talking about, is that there are many tools to be able to get us to get those attributes. But backing them up from a planning perspective, it's really important to understand what those favorable attributes might be. So there are a lot of assumptions that we are making here of having housing and this mixed use in the downtown be a good thing for many of those attributes. But there are other tools that Salem in particular, wearing my Salem hat briefly, does that are deeper than that, deeper than use of a particular property. We're looking at, development of boards and commissions like Salem Redevelopment Authority or the Design Review Board in the downtown that does facade improvements and facade easements. And again, there are other planning tools that are planning related, but also both this public and private partnership, that's a really important piece. So again, thinking about those attributes would be helpful for us, so I will be able to help us move along with finding the right tools and the right matches and examples for us as well that meet our needs, meet our community needs. So,
No, another perspective, I think it'll be great.
I agree.
One thing
so
that
excited.
you notice in Beverly and also in Salem, you've got a college town. You've got,
Yeah, that's true.
2 or 3 colleges
Yeah.
either in the town or right adjacent to it.
Yeah.
And that drives the employees who are gonna work in those shops and so on, and that kind of lends to the kind of artsy. You got Montserrat down there, you've got Nicollet College, you've got Salem State, you've got Gordon College. So those kind of, populate with students, and you've got the housing for them, and then the biggest thing is the train. I mean, I managed a couple buildings in Beverly, and the majority, a fair amount of the people that live in those buildings are on Rantoul and Elliott, they work downtown, so they walk to the train station. So that's a big part of the draw, that to live there. So I know it's great, and going downtown Danvers and hitting the Berry Tavern and Osborne Tavern, we've got 2 locales down there and some other little restaurants, but is that gonna be enough? And again, more stuff will come, but I guess philosophically, we gotta examine what we really wanna attract, and are we gonna have enough to attract the development that, 2-bedroom condos, you're looking at $400,000.
But I think to your point, Jim, that's what the public process piece will help us flesh out. And if the community comes to a conclusion that it doesn't, I'm just gonna use hyperbole so that I don't get too close to where we might end up. Let's just say it's 7 stories to be economically feasible. And we just as a group are like, well, that's not what we wanna do. We wanna explore some other option. What are our other, that's okay. And it's been a valuable exercise because we've now identified some of those attributes of what we're willing to trade and what we're willing to give. So again, I don't have a problem engaging in a process, and if that should affect the scope of this work. And in some places it's gonna push, in some places it's gonna pull.
Have we got any feedback from Hot Watts reuse, or, because that would seem to me that, the business is going out of there if it
Yeah.
hasn't already. That would be, I think, a big jump start to that area, and that would probably kind of dictate where we might be headed.
The Lee family is at another public meeting right now at the senior center, continuing the conversation with the preservation committee about the demo delay on those sites. I know that the Lee family is close to Mayor Scanlon, and Mayor Scanlon's been a kind of consulting with them and riding shotgun, and he had a health incident last week, so I don't know how that affects them, but I know from beforehand, the Lees want to move, I'll say quickly, I don't know anything that the public doesn't know, but I think once Hot Watts out of that property, they need to move on that.
Which is what I think they're doing now. They're investigating their options. What buildings will they have difficulty on that are historical, which
Right.
aren't?
They don't even know how to market,
No.
they don't even know how to market the site,
Yeah.
because they don't know what they can, so I don't know, and I'm looking forward to touching base, with staff and with the Lees in the wake of tonight's preservation meeting to find out if we have any more details on their
So-
proposed timeline.
Have you thought, is the town thought about a potential TIF for a particular location? Make sure we get to me, the whole key is get the right developer,
Yeah.
right? Who has the ability to execute.
Yes, we
And-
have discussed TIF. How realistic is that when we looked at the numbers? It's matching the scale of the development to the what it would take to do the TIF. Danvers has only done one in the past, and it was a sizable investment by cell signaling up at the
Oh,
old King's Grant.
Okay,
Why don't you explain what a TIF is? for
Yeah.
those who don't know?
Sorry.
yeah.
TIF
Tax
is tax
increment
increment financing, and it is a mechanism where the state allows the locality to excuse or defer part of the taxes that new development brings to, so if you have a certain site and you give it a TIF agreement and that new value of that site goes up, you're basically deferring the tax hit on that private developer, typically in exchange for local benefit, such that basically, but for that tax break, that development couldn't happen.
Right.
So we have discussed that, I mean, not at that, not with the Lees, I would say that. But again, it's a tool, it's one of those tools that's in the box, that we have discussed.
Which gives the town a little bit more influence on how it
Yep.
gets built and what
Yep.
gets built,
Yep,
and by who. I think it's a great tool. A lot of stuff's been built that way, you know that, Aaron,
Yep.
so.
yep. Again, it's a matter of matching the scale
Yeah.
to the tool, and
Yeah.
that's something,
Yeah.
again, we're kind of in a waiting mode for the landlord, for the property owner to kind of give us some indication of what they want to do and how quickly.
Well, before we move on, we've had a couple of patient people out there. Is there any comments? No? Go right ahead. We welcome all comments.
You know the drill, go to the microphone.
Yeah, we'll use it. Nova Salmon Town Meeting Member, Precinct 1. I'm just going to reiterate, but people started to talk about Beverly Salem thing. Yes, I also love those two towns. And again, vibrancy, so much more there. And I know that we don't have the train, and I know that that is an actual problem. But the only way we're going to attract people otherwise is to build up our downtown so that it is attractive. I don't think we can just depend on like, well, this is what we've got. So if you like it, great. If not, sorry, that's all we've got. And I think we definitely want to keep 3 stories going down High Street, because if we put businesses all along there, we're going to want residents to support those businesses. Like, I don't know, I'm not sure what the district is called, over by where the explosion was, that building. But, is that Danversport?
Do we end up calling that-
Yeah.
But that was industrial at the
Waterfront-
time.
Waterfront
Right, that was
district.
industrial, so I'm just,
Right.
I don't know, the businesses that got put in there afterwards that are not surviving, is it because residents are not allowed there, or did they just not choose to build them? Because those, I mean, there's one left, I think, that's.
Yeah, those buildings were rebuilt, they were not pre-existing non-conforming, and state law allowed them to rebuild themselves as pre-existing non-conforming properties.
Gotcha.
Why they're not successful, I don't know. It could be a
Right.
combination of bad, business plan.
Right.
Combined with
I
bad
just,
location, combined,
yeah.
but I don't know, but
right?
You're right, I don't think there's anybody left down there.
I think there's one place.
But you can put residential above it.
You can, no, that's what I was
definitely
wondering, if
in the
it was
zone that we
allowed.
fixed.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes. And
in the
they're
zone,
they're
but
in
They
that
just
zone.
chose not to.
Correct.
Correct.
Okay, gotcha.
They use the same footprint as
The
before.
same footprint because it was an involuntary
Yeah.
cause that made the building got destroyed. So
Right.
therefore, they didn't have to come back in front of us. That's why you end up with a restaurant with no landscaping and all
Yes.
impervious surface, which
Yeah.
is ridiculous.
Yeah, yeah,
But
very attractive.
because it was an involuntary cause that forced them, out of business, we weren't able to
Right,
regulate
do
it.
anything about that.
So,
And I think, and I know that parking and traffic is an issue. I think traffic is just one of those things, like, I commute into Boston every day, and over, I don't know, the past 4 years, maybe 5 years, it's gotten so different. It's so much more traffic. So I think it's just something, we either have to use more public transportation or we have more traffic. That's just it. That's just where we're at. We're not going to limit it. It's just not going to happen. But I think if you want to do something that might ease some tension, that traffic, the intersection at 23 is a nightmare. And so if you were able to get those lights reconfigured or something to ease that traffic, people could at least go, oh, hey, this is fixed.
And
And
that's what-
so then they'll be more apt to go like, oh, well, that's better than it was, so maybe we can handle this. Whereas if we just keep stacking it up, because yeah, the time, I don't know how to fix the timing of those lights. I've looked at, because I live right over there. So I'm at those all the time, and I've looked going like, how should these be timed so that it works? But it's just a nightmare.
One of my number one issues.
Yeah, I mean, it's huge, and I'm like, I know it
No,
was the
that's
state,
High
High
Street
Street.
and 128, it's.
and
it's
it was
prob-
it
there's a
was the
problem.
state, right? That
The
put
state's
that
the one
in?
that
State
controls it,
controlled right of way.
yeah.
But can we
Yeah.
go to the state and
Well,
go,
Actually, I think the
absolutely.
DTAG needs to go to it, isn't it?
Well, I mean, DTAC, the local
They start
traffic
the
advisory
process.
committee, well, we can
Well,
go to the
anybody-
state, but I
anybody- yeah.
mean, we often use DTAC, our local traffic commission, as kind of
What is selectmen
put the letterhead, put it on DTAC letterhead to underscore to the state that we're not too happy with it. And that communication has been ongoing basically since those intersections were completed. But I agree, and that's why, in part, I thought it was important to bring the two projects together, because as someone who lives in that neighborhood as well, in the Plains Park side of that
Yeah.
corridor, traffic never backed up to the
No, it-
friendlies before.
No.
And I can't imagine, I know there's more cars on the road, but something's changed.
yeah, no, it's definitely, yeah.
So we need to hit that.
And down Purchase Street, it backs, I mean, it's just.
But to your point, I also would say that traffic's there whether we do anything or not.
Well,
So we have to make sure that we're articulating to the community that, let's not let some things, an externality like that, prevent us from realizing a better version of ourselves.
Correct. We're not going to just limit and go like, okay, no more, this is the amount of cars we are allowed to have through the town. It's just not going to happen.
Right.
So we have to either
Right,
deal or,
right.
I don't
So
know,
that'll be
not
front and
that.
center. I think that's gonna be
Yeah,
an issue
but-
we hear about the whole time.
I think it would just help to have some things some things with traffic get fixed. That way people are like, oh, maybe we can,
Yeah.
do this. Okay, thanks.
Doesn't a bus go through Danvers and go right to the Salem train station?
It does.
Yeah, but I don't know how many people actually are aware of that, because,
And I think that
Yeah.
goes to Charles's point. I mean, well, let's make sure
Yeah,
that those things are
PR,
properly
talk to
signed
the
and
T,
that they're
yeah.
properly outfitted. And we did talk to the T over the summer about requesting upgrades. They published, I think, maybe it could have been two years ago, but I'll say a year ago, they put out new bus accessibility guidelines for their station stops, meaning just wherever they happen to stop. These facilities should have X attributes. And we did ask the T, when are you getting to when are you getting to our stops for those enhancements? And Jim, you brought up earlier, that other Endicott Street station, is scheduled for an upgrade, and we did talk to them about reserving the right to have a private partner add a shelter to that stop. So the T is doing some things and is trying to be proactive, and we've also responded by saying, you know, we'd love those upgrades. We'd love you to come through and make all of those stops, you know, up to your current guidelines, so trying to pay attention to those.
I'm not sure most people in town could tell you where the bus stops are.
I don't think they could either.
Or when they are. I know I'm always surprised when I drive through downtown and suddenly it's a bus in front of me.
Well, they used to always have the one that went from the mall, one mall to the other mall.
Yeah, yeah,
I
that's
know
right,
When we were
yeah.
kids, you could take the mall to
That's
North Shore
right.
Mall, and then the one back to Liberty Tree Mall.
Well, have they stopped it? Because Bob and I actually did it one time. We used to do it, we'd
You
walk
can
over to
take the
Liberty Tree
Lynn
Mall.
one
Yeah.
from Danvers
Liberty Tree Mall
to,
to-
from Liberty Tree to North Shore.
Yeah.
I think they go back and forth, but it was a specific bus that just went back and forth between the
Yeah.
two malls though.
Right.
This one, there's a route that goes and hits a bunch of other things too.
As for, like, public knowledge of the buses and their schedules, or even just their stops, is that something that we could necessarily develop, like a public service announcement campaign around, or something like that?
So as part of my role, transportation and what's, they call it, the buzzword is the last mile connections. That's where you know, Boston Region's transportation network is horrible. It was built on a spoke and hub kind of system, and now everybody needs to go east-west, and we're not set up for that. So that's a high priority. We're working on another vein on trying to figure out if we can get a shuttle from Beverly Depot to Cherry Hill. We're talking to Backer Hot Lot. They're moving out to Electronics Ave. What can we do to assist people getting out to industrial, Electrics Ave, to that industrial park? Because a lot of those are still industrial and manufacturing, and they have shift work, and, you know, we need to get people to those businesses, because there's no way to get to Route 1. There's,
Old
it's very
Neighborhood did a
difficult.
bus. Old Neighborhood did a bus
So
from,
they
from the
did.
facility in Lynn.
And, right.
I remember,
And
I was just thinking
so
about that, yeah.
That's one of the ones where we're looking for synergy, because there's a lot of workforce, and that was something else that we've identified, is that a lot of our workforce is coming up from the south, Boston, Lynn, and those connections are hard to make. We got people, you know, taking a 2-hour commute, 3 connections to get to Danvers on public transit, and so we are aware. Will this planning initiative get to that to some small degree? But we are also working on trying to be creative. We're working with Beverly, Salem. So there's some real thought going into that. We brought in MAPC, the mayors of, as I said, mayors of Salem, mayor of Beverly, Peabody, Danvers are all working right now on trying to figure that piece out.
I'm assuming there's an MBTA app or something you could have on your phone, and you could say, okay, what time do the buses go in Danvers? Could they promote that? You know, because if you've got,
Well, I think the answer is we're gonna have to promote that. I mean, I think it's gonna be on our
is there a
shoulders
budget
to,
for that, or trying to advertise that, or, you know, it would seem to me that would kind of drive it.
Yeah.
If you could just look on your phone and,
Yeah.
oh, look, there's a schedule. And-
I think you can do that, but
Everyone looks at their
yeah,
phone.
it's a matter of getting the word out there, and what connections, where can you get? Why would you want to do that as an option as opposed to jumping in your car? So I think there's a lot of work to be done there, but yeah. Transportation is definitely going to be on the top of the list in the coming years.
Well, people's perceptions have to change too. If you think about sitting in your car, sitting in traffic for an hour and a half, and you think about, maybe I can take the bus over to the Salem Depot, and it's gonna take me 20 minutes by bus to Depot, and then a half an hour into Boston, so you spend 50 minutes, instead of your hour and a half on 128.
Yeah, and you could read the paper.
And you can read the
You can
paper.
work
I used to
too.
say, people love, because I did a lot of transportation stuff years ago too. People love the train because you can read the whole Boston Globe in 30 minutes by the time you get from Beverly to Boston.
Self-driving cars too, that'll do.
Mine's
I'm not
almost.
down with self-driving cars. I think Charles has a comment.
Charles, go ahead.
Bringing it back to downtown for a moment, this is both a series of comments and a question. I liked Aaron's comment about being like a 7 to 11 town, because I know one of the major complaints that our more youthful inhabitants have is that there's really nothing to do here, right? You know, we have 2 bars and they're fine, but if you want to actually do something, you have to go to Salem or Beverly, and then you have to either pay for an Uber or have a designated driver, and then you're out, and it's just a hassle. And so I like Ms. Samday's comment. Am I saying that right?
Yeah, I know that, I was impressed, like, oh, you got that right.
About vibrancy, right? But I would like to see us looking forward, and as the person who, if I'm lucky, will have to deal with the consequences of these actions the longest.
What are you trying to say, Charles?
Because that won't be around.
I'd like to see Danvers become more vibrant while still maintaining its really small town charm. But I don't think that we can necessarily achieve that unless in public spaces like the downtown area, we really put an emphasis on pedestrians coming first and traffic not necessarily being like the intruder, but feeling as though they have to really be aware. You know, one of the problems that I was having with people complaining about the 2 new stop signs coming in, and I was in CJ's grade, and you know, we had gone to elementary school together and I knew him really well, was that, you know, well, I've been in this habit for so long, I'm never going to see these 2 stop signs. It's like, well, have we forgotten that you always have to be really aware when you're driving? And if you can't see 2 giant red octagons, how are you supposed to see a child? And so going off of Jim, who is voicing some concerns about parking as we increase the density, how feasible would it be for us necessarily to rework the parking spaces that we have downtown, which are currently parallel to the sidewalk, and make them diagonal,
That was in the
thereby
report.
both
That's been a comment.
That's been in the
increasing.
report.
Okay, so I mean, I'm not an expert, but at the surface, I feel like that could increase the parking while not necessarily providing more to induce demand, and could also provide some traffic calming elements for better walkability downtown.
Where would you do angled parking?
Anywhere we
Maple
could,
Street.
yeah, Maple Street, between,
Yeah, it used to be.
like Maple and High.
It used
Well,
to
there
be.
was a conversation
Used to
about,
be that, was it?
The problem is you're backing into
I know,
the
you
right
back
of
No,
way.
you do
to the traffic.
reverse
Yeah.
angle, you do reverse angle, yeah, all right, I'm in, we're doing it.
well, the other
I
thing is
think it's
that
in the
there's
side-
that,
It's
there's,
in the report too.
there's the dead
Reverse
space
angle.
across from that.
You back in.
The area
to
in
the
front of
spot.
CVS.
Pull out. Oh, yeah.
No, no.
Oh,
The
Jim, we're
area,
in.
the area in front of,
We're
Back in
Mr.
engineer
Chairman is
type
speaking,
people.
I can't
Sorry.
hear him.
the area in front of, CVS and that large the large sidewalk in front of, on the other side over there as you go down towards, that, those used to be more narrow. And that's when we had the diagonal parking. And then when they expanded the walkways, and so now we even discussed it
See
briefly.
the old curb line, and
Yeah,
the curb line's still there.
we've even discussed about moving it back, and then now it widens out the road, so you could do the diagonal parking that you're talking about.
I'd like to see a little common there.
You're back in, going down. I can't
Look,
see.
you could come up with anything.
No, I think.
There's a lot of
Yeah, a lot
places,
of
that have- there's,
accidents.
no, there's a lot
Never
of
seen
places that
reverse
have,
in parking, huh?
there's a lot of
Where's that?
places that I've been
It's
through,
not on the main
downtown
road.
areas that have diagonal parking. They pull in, people pull out. But they're in,
But
they
those
are
are-
traffic calming areas. Those, they're there, and when you can't go 30 miles an hour through
And
downtown, you're
people
not
shouldn't-
supposed to.
People shouldn't be. You want, and the
Right.
businesses want you to go slower because they want you to be able to see what they have too. You don't want that to be a thoroughfare.
They
If you
shouldn't
slow
be,
traffic
but they
down through
do.
downtown, it becomes a destination instead of a cut through. That's the idea.
People wanna get to work, they don't wanna be slowed down anymore.
Then don't go
Well,
through
then
downtown,
take
Yeah,
that's
but
the
then why go
idea.
through the
them and get on the
downtown?
train.
You know, we have
Downtown's not to go
62,
through.
maybe.
Well, for some people, that's,
It's to go to.
then you wanna have them go through your neighborhood instead? How else are they
No,
gonna get through?
that's
No,
not true.
I think it's
They'll go to the main roads. That's what they're there for.
But you got one highway over here, and you got one highway over there, and you're in the middle. So you gotta get to one of those highways.
True.
I
So
think they should
either
have a
you're gonna
shuttle too from
Go
down.
straight through, or you're gonna go through neighborhoods. Which,
And the other thing is that this isn't just a problem common to Danvers. Everybody has this problem with traffic. Traffic is incredible. Waze is the worst thing that ever happened to small towns because you
Yeah.
can find your way around any of our big highways now. And so we're all dealing with it, and something's gonna have to happen eventually. We're gonna reach that limit where people just aren't gonna be able to get down 128 or get down you know, I would go over to Linfield to get my grandkids, and I know the back ways. I check ways in the morning before I leave. And if 93, 95's backed up, then I know just how to go. But that's becoming more and more bumper to bumper through this little town, Main Street.
Well, that's the thing, I think most communities are quick to blame cut-through traffic for all the problems, but I guarantee you, if we put a list of the number of car registrations in Danvers against those communities, we've all increased
Yes.
roughly
Everything
proportionally.
is,
I mean, higher income communities probably have added a little bit more, but you can't drive, you can only drive one car at a time. So, I mean, what's happening on the roads is really,
More people.
everybody is doing it more. I mean, everybody's making more trips. And that's to come back to this project is, and Charles said it, and I actually have used the phrase, focusing on pedestrian-oriented development in these areas to reduce the need to get in the car. Now, is it gonna mean that someone who lives 3 miles away is going to walk all the way downtown? Probably not. But at least we can do what we need to do to ensure that the development that we invite to the area doesn't need to use the car for every little thing. I mean, we can't control the T, we can't get you on a bus necessarily, we can't make you use those other modes, but in this area, we can ensure that the development pattern is consistent with prioritizing pedestrians appropriately, and not to just do it to do it. We're doing it to buttress the business district. We're doing it to add people, to add customers. I mean, to your point, you know, the businesses won't come if there aren't people.
Right, you need the residential in that downtown area.
Right.
On High Street, those businesses need to survive.
Right. So,
There's not enough people within a half mile to a mile
Right.
walking distance to support, I guess, many, without people driving.
And they have to drive, if you're 3 miles away, you drive to Hobart Street parking lot, park there, and then walk.
well, and there's other things like with the wayfinding, I mean, have we done enough to make sure that people are going to the lots and utilizing the lots? And I know it's a third rail in this town, but we don't charge for parking. That's a major no-no from a planning perspective. I'm not gonna push that in the short term, but that is part of the problem with the way parking is utilized in our downtown. You don't have to believe me, but that is empirical fact. You know, so, I mean, there's things that we need to do, there's a conversation we need to have over time and recognize that this process isn't going to solve all of those problems in one fell swoop, but again, it's a way to have a dialogue, to continue the dialogue about what we want to be as a community and where are we at now. Again, we don't have to set it in time forever, we just have to figure out what's going to work for us for what we conceive of the next kind of medium to long term, the next couple of business cycles, what do we think is possible?
Yep.
Some future board will revisit that in 20 years and say, well, they did a good job, but they were crazy.
The one that
We
Charles
need
is
to
on.
correct this.
Jim will still be here, right?
Jim will be here still too,
Thanks,
yeah.
Joe.
Yeah,
We reel it in.
so,
I'll be gone.
you'll be rowing him, is it? Oh, wheeling it, yeah.
Okay, are we all set with this? At least for now. I look forward to the heated debates
I
that we
got
will
more
have
than
in
we
future
needed and then
months.
some.
That was a good discussion.
No, it was excellent, actually, yeah. Okay, let's move on to the minutes for August 14th.
Motion to approve.
Second?
All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? All right, anything else from staff?
Don't think so.
Do we have anything with?
Second Tuesday.
Yeah, did we, I apologize, I wanna bring up something off, did we need to name a clerk? Cause I think John was not here the night that
haven't-
he was
yeah.
supposed to be
I'm
named.
surprised you guys were so kind of didn't vote me in with.
I know,
wanted
right,
to
but
wait
I'm
for
not
you,
positive,
so-
but I mean, was
Thanks,
that,
John.
did that need to happen?
Yes.
Yeah, so we need to nominate a clerk.
I nominate John Farmer as clerk to the planning board.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
Wow. Motion. See that, Charles?
Good luck, John. So I think that's everything we've got, right? Just,
What's the status of new members? I think we need to
I've-
talk about.
oh, yeah.
Yeah, I was hoping that either, Bill as chair or Peg as being around during the day would be willing to sit in some, interviews with the town manager and a couple of people that have expressed interest in serving. Does that,
As long as the timing's right, I.
right,
yeah.
I just knew, recognizing that we're likely to try to meet with them during the day, that puts a crunch on you. And if you're not available, I was gonna see if Peg.
Peg's been our daytime liaison, I think, for the board lately.
Right, and I don't mean
They
to
only
impose,
retired.
I don't mean to impose on you, Peg,
No,
but I
that's
just
okay.
figured,
As I said, I defer to the chairman can't make it, I'm more than willing to go
That'd be
and
great.
sit in.
Yeah.
so,
It'd be important to have one of us from the board there, I think.
next meeting schedule, I bring up next meetings, because obviously we are looking to get fully, a full roster for you. Your next meetings would be October 9th, the Tuesday right after Columbus Day, and then I can't add 14, the 23rd. We do have some rumblings of applications, so I think we will have something for that second October meeting or the first November meeting.
But not, what about the 9th? I'm not sure, I think I may be home, but I may not be.
Gonna look to Francine, performance guarantees.
Let me
And
know,
maybe,
let me
like-
know if that's the only thing on there.
Oh, because you have to recuse.
And then I may have to come home from there.
Ardmore might be ready, one of those. 23rd.
Yeah, we gotta make sure that we'll have a full
Well,
board
that's the
for
thing that
that,
we
yeah.
do run into, because there is an issue, I think I started to
Yep.
tell you that, you know, there's a potential, there is an applicant that I gotta recuse, and Bill's gonna
Look into it.
possibly.
We gotta check on that.
So
yeah.
we have to have 3 voting members, and I'm just wondering, what's the process for Charles graduating to a full
Yeah.
member?
We'll have to pass the test, right?
Yeah.
Draw up the map
Yeah.
and,
You're currently on double
Well,
secret probation.
since you loved my reverse back in angled parking,
You're
that's
one
a
of
good,
those.
that's a good.
I can't stand those people. Why is this guy backing up in front of me? Oh, he's backing into a space that he could have just gone in 10 minutes ago.
So yeah, that's high on my list, and I apologize, we've had a lot going on, so we're not where I wanted to be on that, but
But you think
We will
that'll
get
be
you a member.
person will be in play by November, a new person, and then what, I mean, I remember, I don't think I was an associate member for long at all. I don't know what the protocol is.
I was for
Yeah.
a year.
I was a year. But Christine was not.
right.
Christine came on
I think
as an
necessity is
associate
going to
and-
drive some
and went up.
of this, and it is what it is, so we're gonna,
I feel that Charles is mature beyond his years. I would vote for his
okay,
We've been saying
bump up
that
in
for years.
status.
yep,
Okay.
nope, that's good, but we still need to find somebody, and ideally, I would like to find somebody who expresses an interest, that we don't have a seat for, because we need to be able to, in the future, have a bench that we don't have at all right now. We need to cultivate, Mr. Bradstreet, you've been coming to a lot, I mean, we need to have people.
He hasn't been here since you asked him.
Yeah,
Didn't
he's,
you
'cause
ask him?
he's
Yeah,
really
we
scared
haven't-
off.
We haven't seen him.
He thinks I'm serious, he
He's
thinks I'm
behind you.
serious, he thinks I'm
He's here in
serious.
spirit.
He thinks I'm serious, but.
You know he's
I
watching
have
right
to-
now, right?
I know. So yeah, no, we'll make progress on that, but like I said, my goal is to identify more than what we need so that we always have kind of a reserve core, short list.
Are you calling for term limits? Is that what you're implying?
Are you asking me for
Jim
that?
just got scared.
I can make something happen.
Oh,
No,
wow. You
no,
got a golden
no.
watch.
No, but I just think, again, we
Retirement
have,
package.
I think the ZBA just lost a member, I think they have a different setup, so that's less critical for them. Conservation is down a member right now, and believe it or not, anyone watching at home, we really, are looking for people to fill these important board spots, and, so, a lot of people fill out the form, and they feel like that's their civic duty, that they said they would volunteer, and then when you call them, it's, well, no, I filled out the form. So we're trying to get to that next level. So we'll have progress on that for sure by the next meeting.
Great.
All right, so unless there's anything else, looking for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Nice
All those
job,
in
John.
favor? Aye.
Aye.
Good, Johnny.
Opposed? Good, we're out.
I'm taking Bill's job.